The sun was darkened for 3 hours. And I've heard it said this is a solar or lunar eclipse of this is supposed to be why the sun gets dark for 3 hours. But in the documentary, you bring up that it's likely a dust cloud, and you have some scholars, there's scientists that are saying, look, this is well known. The dust cloud can get so thick that it can literally darken the sky, where it's almost like not I'm giving a bad example here, but it's almost like when a volcano goes, it darkens the sky. Well, when you've got dust particles heavily in the air, it can darken the sky. And this event of this darkening, the timing of the crucifixion, that you've come up with the exact day of when that could fit, the 14th, 15th of Nisan, and right before Passover and all that, the temple veil being split. Can you elaborate on these three things? Because these seem to be like hot button issues right here. Like, this is where it gets really into the hot stuff. You don't have to believe a guy rose from the dead. You don't have to believe, he walked on water and fed 5,000 people. But these events, are they completely mythical? Or is there a precedence in history of some type of evidence we can see and say, hey, this is possible, that they're really mythologizing natural events? And one of them is the earthquake and the dust cloud. Can you elaborate on that?
All right, let me start with the earthquake. So there's something known as the Jerusalem Quake. It struck between 26 and 36 AD, probably in the middle of that time period. It looks like it was a fault that broke about like this. It was between a 6 and a 6.5. The epicenter was about here. This is about 40 or 50 miles away from Jerusalem. So this earthquake would have been felt. You would have been scared feeling this in Jerusalem. It's what I call a couch mover. It might knock things off the wall and it might move your couch. It's probably not going to kill you. It probably didn't kill anybody. It probably didn't crash any buildings, but any weak structure, poorly designed structure might fall over. And any place that underwent seismic amplification would have some damage. Now, the next thing to know about this earthquake is Josephus tells us in 19 BC, Herod decided to rebuild the temple. He took the existing platform and he expanded it to what we see today. And it's a big, vast platform. And the topography underneath the temple is undulating. It's hilly. So they had to put in what we call, as engineers, fill. Probably it was quarry chips. They had to lay down all sorts of fill around here and then put those big Herodian paving stones on to create this flat platform. Well, in geotechnical earthquake engineering, when you have a fill, which is by definition what we would call seismically soft, low shear velocity layer, laying on top of a seismically hard, fast shear velocity limestone layer, when these shear waves are coming up from the earthquake, coming up in the earth, when they hit that interface, they get amplified. And the shaking in that soft layer now becomes 2 to 5 times as much as the surrounding area. So this Temple Mount area, clearly, to any geotechnical earthquake engineer, is going to undergo seismic amplification. Maybe not in all areas, and we don't know where the temple was, so there's some mystery there, but clearly in some parts of this area, there is going to be some seismic amplification. And we can see that from the history. The next structure after the temple was destroyed in 70 AD was Al-Aqsa Mosque, when the Muslims showed up. Al-Aqsa Mosque was destroyed completely twice in its first 100 years by earthquakes, and one of them wasn't really even that big. Al-Aqsa Mosque's roof collapsed entirely during the 1927 Jericho earthquake. And in 2004, about a 5.2 earthquake off of Lebanon, pretty far away and not really that big, opened up a 5-foot hole close to the Temple of the Rock. So we have also historical evidence, but the engineering evidence that this place undergoes seismic amplification. So this is an earthquake that probably would have damaged the temple. I'm talking about the one in the sediments. I call the one in the sediments the Jerusalem Quake. I call the one in the story the Crucifixion Quake. I don't know if that earthquake is real, the Crucifixion Quake. I work on the Jerusalem Quake. In 2011, archaeologists who were working on the Western Wall Tunnel, which goes right adjacent to the Temple Mount platform, found a pier. This is like a column for a bridge, and it had earthquake damage in it. And so the way they dated this layer is they looked below, and the layer below was the end of this Herodian temple rebuilding project, which is approximately 27 AD. It depends on how you arrange the sources. And then the next level above it is the destruction of the temple at 70 AD. Now, this is not very good dating, but we have now evidence of seismic damage right adjacent to the temple, which indicates probable seismic damage to the temple itself. Then in 2020, someone did some microarchaeology dating, some detailed radiocarbon dating, and they found out that this column of this bridge had been expanded south and doubled in size. And the radiocarbon dating said this happened right around 30 AD. So this gives us our date. And the reason why this is important for archeoseismic information is frequently when we look in the archeoseismic record, we may not see a destruction layer from an earthquake because people repair after it. So one of the indicators of an earthquake is this repair. So we have earthquake evidence, and then we have evidence of this repair happening around 30 AD. So I would say we have pretty good evidence that this earthquake, the Jerusalem quake, did some damage to the temple. And that probably would have been noticed and talked about. This is the temple in Jerusalem. It's the most important structure in the entire country and the entire religion. So now we come to the next part, the veil. Well, the first thing we got to look at is the Gospel of the Hebrews, right? The legend of the Gospel of the Hebrews says that this was written by the disciple Matthew around the year 40, maybe 7 years after this event, before he left to evangelize. And we have an ancient source. It's quoted by Eusebius, but it is a Papias. And Papias was supposedly a hearer of John. In other words, he knew the disciple John. This is one generation separated from this. And he says, Matthew put the Logia in ordered form in Hebrew, and everybody interpreted as they could. So this is talking about an ancient document in Hebrew that maybe wasn't too well written, maybe isn't the great literary constructions that we have in the New Testament gospel. And there's no evidence that the Gospel of Matthew, written in Greek, is translated from some earlier Hebrew or Aramaic version. This gospel's lost, but we have 25 fragments of it quoted by other authors. So Jerome, who wrote the Vulgate, in 398 goes to the Library of Caesarea, fishes out, he speaks Hebrew, fishes out the Gospel of the Hebrews, which at this point is the Gospel of the Nazareans, and we have no idea how faithful it is to this supposed original copy. But he says, in two different quotes, he says, this says that the lintel of the temple broke and crashed to the ground during this earthquake when Jesus died. Well, to me, when I read that as a seismologist, that rings a bell. Because the lintel, the doorway, that's the weakest part of the structure. Maybe it's not the weakest, but it's real close. You can go to Kalat Nimrod in northern Israel, where I forced Marco to go and do some filming that he never put in the movie. And there are 90 evidences from an earthquake in 1759 with doorway damage, arch damage, and lintel damage. It is a very frequent effect, seismic effect on these structures. So when that is spoken, that's extremely credible. Well, what is attached to the lintel? The curtain. It may not be attached to the lintel, it may be to the side of the lintel, but if the lintel's going to break, something's going to happen to that curtain. It may crumple, it may fall off of a rod, it may tear, who knows what will happen to it. But it's indicating that if that happened, there's curtain damage. So what do we have in all three Gospels? We have the curtain being torn. So first off, what is the greatest sin in Hollywood? The only sin? Never be boring. right? So these guys are going to describe what's happening. What are they going to do? Are they going to tell you the curtain crumpled or it got a little bit dirty? No! Tear it apart. Tear the veil between the divine and human. And now by making that dramatic, you've given it a second profound theological meaning, that you have now removed the barrier between man and mankind. And that's the one we actually remember today. It was so effective that we remember it. Now, I have no idea. I wasn't there. I don't know if this happened. But this is the part of the veil. So if you want, I can go into the last part, which is the dust, which is highly speculative. Yes? Okay, so I have a chronology problem. The problem I have is I could, I think, figure out a way to figure out the exact year and time of year when the earthquake and the sediment happened. But I don't know the exact year when Jesus died. So I'm never going to be able to say, is that the same earthquake? Because we have to do detective work because these guys didn't tell us what year. So we have 30 and 33, but they're just probabilities. So I'm looking at it and I'm realizing, let's say Matthew's written 40, 50 years later, and he's the Jewish gospel. So I think Matthew knew about this earthquake. That's my opinion. This earthquake fits so well. I think he knew about it. But over 40 years, you have a story of an earthquake damaging the temple, and you have the Passion narrative. And it's entirely possible that this earthquake was 2 years earlier, 2 years later, whatever, and eventually they got conflated and put together. So I have no idea if Matthew's timing is correct. I think that this is more or less describing the earthquake I see in the sediments, but no idea if he got the timing right. So the only way I could come up with to try to figure out that timing is the other event that they're talking about is darkness. So what would cause darkness during that time of year? Well, that time of year is Hamsin season, when they have half a dozen to a dozen dust storms. About once every 20 to 50 years, there is a massive blot out the sun from the sky, turn day into night type dust storm. I've been in one in Cairo that wasn't that dramatic, but you can go on YouTube and you can see videos, I can share them with you, where it's bright and shiny in the day and next thing you know it's dark as night. You can't see your hand in front of your face. There are big whopper dust storms like that. Now the advantage of that is a big whopper dust storm like that would leave one heck of a deposit. So it's not looking for anything subtle. So the question I had is, do we have an earthquake and a dust storm happening on the same day? So for a long time I was looking at this dark layer and I was thinking maybe that's a dust storm. Finally I got my association with Cambridge University. I looked at it under the electron microscope and son of a gun, it looks like a dust storm. From particle size distribution, it's 95, 98% below 2 microns. I have to run a lot of other tests that cost money and I can't run them to see if that's that dust storm. And there's a lot of complications here, but the tantalizing thing is, in Engedi, I have my earthquake, I have where I call the top of the earthquake, and I have about 10 layers on top of it. Normally that would indicate about 5 years of deposition, but that's not entirely certain. That's what I'm working with on my article right now. And then there is this dust layer. So that would indicate, okay, this earthquake was a few years before this dust layer. But if I go 30 meters down and I trace this earthquake all the way, guess what? The dust layer is laying right on top of the earthquake. In other words, the dust layer is deposited right after the earthquake, like they happened the same day. Now, how do I explain how it's different in two things? Well, first off, I don't know. This is why, if I ever did this, I'd have to run some tests beforehand, because I would just be fake it till you make it if I was trying to figure this out. But one thing I did notice is there's an earthquake above there about this far from around 110 AD. And this earthquake lasted so long it caused the sediments to flow. And it reactivated the layer of the Jerusalem quake. And it might have scraped off those layers that caused that dust layer to be laying on top of it. That's just kind of one theory, but it points out that I would have to understand the deformation history at a minimum, to try to understand if we have evidence of a dust storm and this earthquake happening at the same time.
Holy crap. Marco, what do you think, man? What do you think?
Like, so now you know. So for over 2 years, my role was like, after I listened to him, it's like, how do I put that on the screen? How do I translate that in a way that everybody can understand it? So that was a challenge, but we found like a great communication after a while. But